Oh, bad start. Outdoor video. I think I'm outdoors. Yeah, outdoors. So I was thinking I would talk a little bit about prevention. Watched the Hofladay response to Trick, and in a way he's rationalizing an argument from because when you prevent something, you can't sit around and enjoy. Like say you prevent something in the sense you prevent the existence of it altogether. Like say I could raise 10 rats, torture the rats, and then kill the rats. Or I don't do that. Now, the case where I don't do it, absolutely nothing in this world is going to indicate the absence of the 10 tortured rats. There's not going to be something around celebrating or enjoying not being tortured. They're not going to be here to do that. But also clearly, when you compare the two conditions, the world where the 10 rats are created, they're tortured, and then killed, and then the world where that doesn't happen, you can clearly do the math and subtract out the thing that's different and say this difference is a significant amount of harm or negative, and therefore it is a positive condition that you're in, not to have that hunk of negative. So you're doing a kind of simple product math. You're subtracting the two circumstances and getting a product that is the subtraction of the differences, the detection of the differences, the separation of the differences. So you don't need the being to be to enjoy, quote unquote, not being. The benefit, the absence of the negative is in itself fundamentally positive, and it's just a bonus when sometimes we are allowed to celebrate the absence of it, to sit here and go, oh, thank God that didn't happen. But it's very real. Let's say I live next door to Jeffrey Dahmer. I have a suspicion he does creepy things. I decide to get him preposterously drunk on the night that he would have gone out and killed somebody. I've clearly prevented the harm, and there's a clear positive difference in the world in the sense that a person who would have been tortured and killed isn't tortured and killed. So the two worlds are fundamentally different. And I have certainly, by getting him drunk, that activity, whether it's I or the universe that flows through me and has created me, altered his behavior through interaction. And therefore, there's an improvement. And then if I found out that, he wrote in a diary about what he was going to do tonight, and I stopped him, then I could also celebrate the fact that I would have knowledge of it, and then the victim could be knowledgeable of it and be grateful that he wasn't tortured and killed. So, there's a lot of extra value that could be gleaned based on the fact that we can experience the benefit beyond just having the benefit of it not happening. That's clearly understandable, isn't it? But that's what our expectation is. There's two different kinds of circumstances. One where you prevent the entirety of something, and where you just prevent something negative in the something. And in the circumstances where you prevent the entirety, then the question is only one that goes to other purposes or functions that need to be evaluated. So with the 10 rat experiment, the argument could be, is the experiment for the purpose of curing disease, let's say? And is that purpose justify the harm that was being imposed? So now you have another element to the analysis, and that element gets judged in a different way, but in a similar way. Why do we try to cure a disease? Because it creates harm. In Hafladay's video, he showed the word harm, or bad, and he put in the category of bad a subcategory of suffering. And it really isn't a subcategory. I don't think you could describe a bad that isn't bad because it doesn't hurt something sentient. So I don't think there's any theoretical bad thing that isn't bad for a reason relevant to the fact that a sentient being will in some way be displeased or underpleased or less than pleased or in some way insufficiently pleased by the thing you're calling bad. All badness has to, in some way, negatively affect the conscious welfare of a sentient. I don't think anything bad can be derived through any other mechanism. So the entire category of bad is harm to a sentient to some degree. Certainly there's degrees of harm, and you can have minor ones, but they still have to exist as a minor one to be categorized as a bad, in my opinion. How's this relevant? This is relevant in the sense that, so the argument left, once you establish that preventing the harm is explicitly, completely a good thing. It's all good to get rid of a harm. All that's the question is, and in and of itself, harm, not a harm that prevents a greater harm. So that's always the context of that statement. So the 10 rat experiment is sitting there, and all we know of it in the first use of that analogy or metaphor is that there's 10 suffering rats, it's all bad, don't do it. So changing the context, what people like Hafladay are implying is that there are reasons to conduct the harm experiment, to risk creating the harm, having the harm, making the harm, because there is a compensation sufficient. And the first, as I say, logical argument one could make would be that there's some greater harm to be prevented by the harm being initiated on the 10 rats. The benefit of advancing medical technology and providing ease from disease and suffering caused by diminished function, degraded function. But then the question there is, that is a purpose, but it's a purpose in a context. So again, now the argument has to be moved, though, to still this bigger picture of, does the need for that exemption from harm, can it be justified, or does it justify itself? You can't say because a victim exists, I am now have carte blanche to create new victims in my effort to save the victim. So then you have to make these arguments in the rational context that because something is, doesn't mean it's justified, and that its consumption and its needs are therefore serviceable at any price. So I suppose an argument can be made that if it can be accomplished in the term of the people who exist now and provide substantial escape from harm, you could logically justify imposing the 10 rat harm to create some amount of current human gratification. But if the context is that the current humans wish to double or triple their need for immunity from harm or to escape harm, then the argument shifts back to a responsibility to say, why was that activity necessary? The two worlds of where you don't create them and you do create them need to be compared and analyzed to figure out whether there was any benefit to be gleaned. Because it appears the only benefit to be gleaned is perceptual, and that what you are in fact going to do is now create an excuse to torture hundreds of more rats in your pursuit of your immunity to a harm, a vulnerability to harm that you willfully and deliberately created. So, this isn't really on Hafladay's point. I've migrated it to this other sub-argument regarding the value of a good, and the fact that if you're going to claim a good, the good can't be the byproduct of your first creating bad. You can't willfully create the problem, then fix the problem, and then say, I have credibility points. I have positive value points to spread around because I broke something and then to some extent fixed it. Yeah, that's not going to work. That's not how you that's not how the math works. The math has to take into account what created a problem in recognizing the economy of a solution. Part of the value, the justification for a solution has to come from the credibility of the existence of the problem. What I really wanted to get to is just his imagery, and I guess I should do that with paper and pencil instead of walk and talk. Oh, sorry, camera's probably not pointed anywhere close to me. This camera's very sensitive. Yeah, it's very not right, and it's also very, you can't be off much. So I just want to get to this visualization that there's an equation inside of the dilemma we create, but there's an absolute frame where you can do the total math. So you have things called subtotals or interior totals, but there is an absolute total, and that's where the fact of our purposeless origins, our non-deliberate, indeliberate origins, are the fact that we have no need to serve outside of the needs we create. That's why this dilemma becomes the problem, is that by comparison, any harm is too much harm because there is no justifying purpose. There's no good outside the framework of the need that we create. The good created by the gratification and satisfaction of our needs is the only good that does really exist. And we're not creating any elevated condition within the universe itself. No enhancement. No benefit beyond our perception, beyond an ego definition and description of ourselves that's very self-serving, and it has no logical diagram. You're saying that the universe is better off because you enjoyed a cupcake, for example, and I think there's no way to make that sensible. Yeah, I just don't. Because there is no hunger in the universe for your gratification. There's no need for it. There is no negative to be corrected, and that creates a substantial problem when anything in the complete, total, any negative you don't create compensation for in the internal frame. You will not be able to justify in the broadest frame, because there will be no purpose served, and therefore no payment, no cost can be justified for nothing purchased. You can't purchase nothing. A non-can opener, for example, it doesn't open cans. You can't justify spending any money for a non-can opener. If they don't give it away for free, you can't justify having one. Oh, pretty this year, these grasses. They've fallen down the last 3 or 4 years because of hurricanes and other things. The first year they've been left alone. Anyway, until next time.